There we go. Now I'm in. Thank you. Hi, Sarah. I have set up a second screen that I'm trying to make it easier to see the agenda. So hopefully this will work.
I'm not very good at that.
Are you on full volume, Sarah? Because you just came through really quiet on my end. I don't know.
Oh, I think I am, but
Okay.
I haven't done anything with my volume, but I can.
Okay. And Christine, how are you? Are you there?
I'm here.
Great. Let's give Zariah a minute or two. If you're here, Zariah, and we just don't see you, let us know. All right, well, I have 5:34, and I think we should get going, even though it's, I don't think we have Zariah joining us yet. We have a number of attendees, and Christine, have you received requests from some to speak?
Yes, I received email requests, and anyone else who would like to speak during public forum, please use the raise hand function here on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. First item is this is a meeting of the City Council Community Development and Neighborhood Revitalization Committee. We are meeting on October 21st. We are convening and we are starting the meeting at 5:35. Can we, anything about the agenda, Sarah, that you want to add or change at this point?
Not at this point.
So this committee consists of Councilors Carpenter, Hightower, and myself, Councilor Pine. I serve as the chair of the committee. For those who aren't familiar with our process, we will go into the agenda in the way it's presented in the order. The public forum is a chance to speak to us about really any issue that you're concerned about that you feel is pertinent to the committee. As we move through the agenda, we will continue to recognize members of the public as time allows, so there will be other opportunities as well. Why don't we open with public forum, and Christine, if you could just let folks in, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Okay, I have Stephen Marshall, Judy Schwartz. You were emailed me and asked to speak. I do not see you as part of this meeting yet. If you are here, please use the raise hand function. So I'll just keep moving through my list. Next, oh, I have a Judy who's here. I'm gonna move her over for public forum. Okay, so Stephen Marshall will be the first one? Judy. Oh, Judy Schwartz will, okay. First. Yep.
Okay, Judy, you're on if you want to. There you go.
Okay. Oh, how come you don't see my picture? Oh, well. All right. Can you hear me?
We can. Yep.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
So, all right. So, I have an owner occupied unit here, and so I'm concerned about the proposed change to make it difficult so that when the truth is, the people I've had stay with me, most of them have stayed for many years, but occasionally I've had people who were really, really noisy, and I live here and I don't want to have to live with that. And what I'm going to have, if I can't ask them to leave at the end of the lease period, I'm going to start calling the police when they make noise instead of just calling them. I don't see how this will end up as anything but getting more difficult for renters to rent, because I'm certainly not going to rent to the kid from Newport who's leaving home for the first time and has no rental history. I'm not going to take a chance at anybody if I'm going to be stuck with them for as long as they want to be there. It just seems unreasonable to me. The whole point of a lease is that you both know the terms of it, how long it's going to be. And I also I want my kids to be able to live in the unit at some point when they're more a little more responsible. And how am I going to make room for, I want to be able to get the income while they're being kids. So I don't see how this new proposal is going to do anything for people who already have trouble, who are less enfranchised. No one's going to take a chance on anybody, because if you're stuck with them, and particularly for owner occupied units, when you live in the same space as the people, not being able to have that kind of control seems kind of like nuts, and also against all of the current rules around over owner occupied units. I just think it's a really bad idea. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. We will certainly address those issues when we get to the committee discussions. Thank you. Christine, who is next here?
Okay, next is Joyce George.
You mentioned Stephen Marshall. Was that a written statement we received already, or was he planning to speak as well? I didn't understand that.
He sent me an email asking to speak.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes, well, I submitted some questions that I would like the answers to. Are you prepared to address those?
During public forum, it's not an exchange of that nature, but if you want to reiterate your questions for us, we will get to that when the committee starts to discuss the issues.
Okay, do I do that now?
You can do that now, sure.
Okay.
If you could speak up a little bit, I'm having trouble hearing people, and you are especially faint on my end.
Okay, my concern is that the committee that came up with this proposal, was that balanced with people who were renting as well as landlords, so you could get both perspectives on the subject? That was my first question. And my second question is, if there wasn't a balance, then is there really discrimination involved if this whole proposal was done one-sided without the benefit of renters as well as landlords?
Thank you, Joyce. We did get your written communication, and I think you've just summarized it very well. We will address those when we move into the substance of the agenda. But this point is really public forum, a chance for people to express their views and share their perspectives with each other and with us and with the public. So we'll keep going through the list and we'll get back to those issues. I've noted them and I promise to you we will discuss them.
Super, thank you.
Okay, I see a Stephen here with no last name. We'll move him over and see if it's Stephen Marshall.
Stephen, we see you on the screen, so when you're ready to unmute yourself, you'll be audible to the rest of us.
Okay, there we go.
Got it.
Terrific.
And visible. Hi there.
Hey, boy, the lighting is terrible. I'm sorry about that. Good enough for me to read. So I sent some testimony just a few minutes before the start of this committee, and I'd like to read it into the record. It goes like this. Every status, banker, landlord, tenant, advocate, lawyer, owner, renter, or homeless person, is a category we engineer into our laws through decisions we make about how to allocate resources, whose rights to protect, which values to advance. Before this committee is a proposal to place on the city ballot an amendment to the city charter to simply allow the city to decide what is just cause eviction. It is apparent in the apparent competition, I'm sorry, I'm amending this as I go, so I'm sorry for my changes. To advance, so this amendment will advance the right of renters to a secure and predictable abode. And in apparent competition with this right is the right to the sovereignty of the property owner to control who uses their property. I propose to you that in the moral universe, when a person buys property and intends to rent it for profit, that person takes on the dignity and esteem of the people who will so rent, and the responsibility to the community in which it is. There will be contract and terms, but the lives contained within the walls of that property have importance. They cannot be treated as a commodity. The gravity of that importance demands that a person cannot be told to leave for whimsical or slight needs of the landlord, such as it's time to tenant. The cost to the tenant of leaving cannot be multiples of the benefit to the property owner. This charter change redresses an imbalance in the law. It gives to the city the ability to locate and enforce the balance point between the rights of the property owner and the right to dignity and well-being of the tenants. This charter change is just, and we, the residents of Burlington, deserve an opportunity to vote on it. And would like to add to my written testimony that I don't want people who have small holdings to worry. I think that in the deliberations of the city council and in the deliberations of these committees, we will certainly see the interests of people being taken into account. What is of utmost imperative is for the city to have the power to say what is a just cause eviction and not to leave it to the random, the unpredictable, the unspecified prerogatives of landlords to decide when and whether to tell someone to leave. And I conclude my statement.
Thank you for that.
I have on my list Heidi Spear. I don't see you in the list, Heidi. If you are here and want to speak, make yourself known, please. So next we will move on to Lam Fan, and I will move them over.
While you're doing that, I'll just point out that the way Zoom works is if your name appears interested in speaking, but yet in Zoom it shows up as a phone number, staff who manages this Zoom process has no way of knowing who you are. So that's why you need to raise your hand in the Zoom feature there, the participant feature, to indicate your desire to speak. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Could you just state your name for the record, please?
Yes, my name is Lam Fan. I'm a Burlington resident, and I just want to say that I believe that housing is a human right, and I believe that having a quality of life is also a human right. And I am a small-time landlord. I'm an owner-occupied landlord, and I don't want to repeat what others have said about the issue with being a owner-occupied landlord in this situation. But I want to share a story that just earlier this summer, during the, at the height of the coronavirus, I work as a construction worker, and I came in to renovate a place where someone had just gotten evicted. And we showed up that morning, and the sheriff had come and evict this household. And many of the neighbors came out, and they practically had a block party when that was said and done. And they thanked me for coming in to do the cleanup work after these folks have been evicted, because they were bad tenants, and they were bad neighbors. They reduced the quality of life for many of the neighbors in that neighborhood, and I can only imagine being that landlord for that particular house, and how terrible it would be for him if he couldn't evict, and he didn't have the option to renew, not really renew the lease. Thank you.
Great. We will definitely speak to that issue. Thank you for your comments, and we'll come to that when we get a chance to talk as a committee.
Okay, next we have Beth Davies Carpinello.
Hello, Beth. If you're on, we see you on, but we just need you to unmute, and then you can speak to us. Hi. I see you, but we don't hear you yet. There we go.
Okay. All right. Hi. Sorry about that. I'm not very technologically savvy.
Well, you are now.
Anyway, I have 3 condos in Burlington, and I've been very blessed. I've never had a problem with a tenant, but what I have had is the tenants complain about other people in other units, and to a certain extent, if it's a condo, the landlord doesn't have complete control over whether you can keep a tenant, because if your tenant is loud or gets a multiple fines and doesn't pay them, the HOA is going to throw them out. So I just would like you to consider that in your discussions. And I also think that you're opening up for a lot of litigation over what is just cause. Violating HOA rules once, 3 times, which rules. It gets very complicated. I think if you have a good tenant and a good landlord, generally the landlord has every incentive to renew the lease. But if I had a really good friend or something that wanted the space, as an owner, I would think it would be my right to, just if the person has, if they've lived there 3 months, they now have a possessory interest that's greater than mine. If they've lived there 1 year, 2 years, I mean, at a certain point, just because they've moved in and they've been there 3 weeks, doesn't mean that they should have a greater interest in the property than I do when I, maintain it and pay all the taxes on it.
Can I, I'm Beth's husband. Can I also add that your memorandum in support seems to confuse ending a lease and eviction. You keep talking about eviction without cause, but your bill goes far beyond protecting tenants from eviction. Your bill gives a possessory in perpetuity interest to tenants. We're not talking about evicting someone during the terms of a lease. We recognize that if a person has a 1-year lease and they're causing problems that might not violate the law, but are nonetheless harassing of people next door or other tenants, or even their roommates, that we would have to take them to court to evict them. But your bill goes way beyond that. We have to renew the lease, even at the end of the term of the lease, in perpetuity. That's not eviction. Telling someone we're not going to renew the lease is not an eviction. But your memo talks about good cause for eviction. And I think that's a major misunderstanding that underlies the entire bill. What you're doing is you're not only giving a tenant a right to remain during the course of a lease, you're giving them the right to remain in perpetuity unless you can prove a violation of the law or some kind of conduct, which you're going to have to take them to court. Most landlord-tenant disputes, and we've had very few, but we have children who are tenants. Most landlord-tenant disputes get resolved because the lease ends after a year. And the landlord says, it's not working out. Please find another place. Or the tenant says it's not working out. This way, you're going to have to go to court because you got the person for the rest of the existence of the property, as long as they want to stay under your bill, as I read it. So you're inevitably going to have way more cases going to court where landlords are going to be objecting to tenants. And I think this also emboldens tenants to when you get a phone call at 2 a.m. from the person downstairs saying the person upstairs is running the music. And I've asked them several times to stop the music. And I can't do anything as a landlord. I have to go to court to get them out because I know that next month, even though their lease runs out, I would have said anyway, listen, they're leaving in a month. Now I've got to go to court because they're not leaving in a month. They're leaving whenever they want to leave, despite the fact that they're causing problems. And I think people have a right to maintain quiet enjoyment during the life of their lease. There's no reason why they should have a greater right than after the termination of their lease.
It also takes away the incentive to be a good tenant. You know, if you do have a minor problem and you say, you know, this isn't working, we really need to, you know, ask you to change, they have no incentive to change because they know you can't get rid of them under any circumstance as long as they pay the rent. You know, and you're going to have a whole heck of a lot of litigation, as all these jurisdictions that do have this, over what is just cause. I mean, that's the bottom line. You know, it's you're opening up a real can of worms, and you give, you know, in the jurisdictions where our kids have been that have this, if the landlord wants them to go for whatever reason it is, and their toilet doesn't function, and they call the landlord and they say the toilet's not functioning, the landlord would say, gee, yeah, I'll have to get on that. And then the weeks will go by. I mean, it changes the whole balance of people's incentive to be a good landlord and a good tenant.
And I just, not to beat a dead horse, but the people who object the most to troublesome tenants are other tenants. And I get this from all sides. My secretary was in an apartment, and the people upstairs were obnoxious, and they were making noise all the time. And there was, you know, so the question is, do we let the lease run out and tell them they're up, or now we have to take them to court? And I've had a couple secretaries in my office who are tenants who have objections to other tenants who are bothersome, obnoxious, and just plain rude. And the remedy, there's a easy remedy, which is at the end of the lease, it's not working out. Thank you. Go find another place. But now you're making us go to court to get them out.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Sir, can I
Thank
get
you.
your name for the record, please?
George Carpinello and Beth Davies Carpinello.
Thank you.
Okay, Christine, who do we have next here?
Next, we have Peter Smyer.
Okay, Peter, you're visible on our screen, or at least your name is. There you go.
Thank you very much. You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I have to say, for a first stab, it's 10% of the time my name gets pronounced correctly. Good job. Thank you. So yeah, thanks for the time. I think that a lot of what I was going to speak to is well stated by the Carpinellos. I submitted a brief written comment to Christine, and I'm just jumping into this, so I mostly just learned about this week. So I admit I'm kind of new to this effort that's going on right now. I will say that I've lived in Burlington for 30 years. I've probably, as a renter, rented probably at least 10 or 12 apartments in town. I feel like I understand the housing stock, and some places are nice and some are pretty worn out. I now am fortunate enough to have lived in a home in Burlington for 15 years, which was paid for, and now my wife and I rent it out as a rental property, and we were fortunate enough to buy a new home on the other side of town. So, you know, this is a little bit new to us, but I think, you know, we've been at it a couple of years, and you know, we're enjoying being landlords. I know it sounds weird, but so I guess I just wanted to elaborate on my written comment, which is this thing that Mr. Carpinello alluded to, of the idea that when a lease ends, not an eviction, but when the lease term is up, and if as owners we want to move in a different direction, that we feel that it's an overreach to establish a bylaw or any type of sort of local control that would prevent us from just simply moving in another direction once that lease term is up. You know, the idea that we'd be forced to re-sign this document against our will, or keep the person in there against our will, just seems wrong to us. I guess I could probably best illustrate it through an example. I mean, as an owner, you know, we have great tenants right now. We love our tenants, but often, you know, when the lease term is up, July 1st, you know, it's usually in February, I reach out and I say, hey, we're gonna, you know, can you re-sign? We're looking to re-sign the lease for next year. And that's our time to start talking to those folks. And I think if somebody either couldn't find a roommate or whatever, wanted to stay but couldn't make it work, I don't know, the idea that we could have 3 or 4 folks lined up that might be better for us, quite frankly, as the owner of the property. We might have a young family. We might have somebody who could sign for 5 years versus a 1-year term that the current tenant is looking for. And we'd like the ability to be able to go with those people and try to make the best choice for us. It's not personal. I mean, even in these situations where there's not a challenging, noisy person in there that we'd like to get out, I mean, we just feel like, you know, our ability to enter into a mutual agreement with somebody, see that through to its end, and then end that agreement mutually, it seems very fundamental to us, without having to prove our way out through a city process when that agreement comes to an end. So I think those are just my comments. I'm still digging into this stuff, but just wanted to make sure that I got that on the record, because I think it is important. And the other piece I guess I would say that I heard also is, I think if there are folks in this working group that are landlords or property owners, I think it is important to get a variety of stakeholders chipping in on this effort, just to make sure that we get the best product out of this. So those are my thoughts, and thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that. Christine, how many more folks have indicated desire to speak? That would be helpful, because we have a 90-minute meeting, and I do have a commitment at 7 that I need to be off in time for. So I just want to make sure that we have a chance as a committee, and I'm just concerned about our time.
Yes, the number keeps growing. Currently, I have 5 people in line.
Okay, well, we've spent a half an hour. We'll go for about, you know, we'll go through these 5 and hopefully.
Let's make that 7.
Okay.
All right, 2 more people just put their hands up.
What do you think, Sarah, Councilor Carpenter, given that we do have some work to do as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to hear folks. I didn't realize our meeting was quite as short. So tonight, we really need to develop a work plan for folks in the public. There was quite a bit of information added to the website. We have 2 documents that I think we need to walk through, and we'll answer a lot of questions. And so I'm concerned about, can we get to that tonight? If we can't, I think it's really important that we get a work schedule that allows us to really dig into some of that information. As we explained to people at our last meeting, there also is quite a bit of information on our website. That's the CDNR page, I guess, of the city website, that has all of the explanations of what happens in other jurisdictions. So I just want us to think out how we're going to get to the sort of meat of the matter. I'm fine with spending another 10 or 15 minutes on comment. I know we have one item that CEDO really needs to have us listen to and talk about, which is not related to rental housing.
Okay, well, let's go through the people who are signed up now, and then we'll have to perhaps look at reconvening for further public comment, but then we have time as a committee to work for some period. I think that would be helpful. So go ahead, Christine.
Okay, Joanne Lafayette is up next.
Welcome to the meeting. We see your name present, so just hit your button and you're all set. Okay.
Okay. I wanted to speak to the issue of the end of the lease as well. At the end of the lease, when the landlord and the tenant are choosing whether or not to renew that lease, I've been a landlord for about 45 years, and I can tell you that if they are good tenants, I do everything I can to get them to renew the lease. The times that I would not want to renew the lease is when someone has been hard to work with, or more, and even as important, is harassing the other tenants in the building. I have had that happen, and in that case, the problem is that if that's the problem, they harass other people in the building, and in fact may even suggest that the physical harm could be done if people didn't do what this tenant wanted. They aren't going, the other tenants and neighbors in the neighborhood are going to really hesitate to go to court and testify to the problem, when in fact, we can't even be sure that if people testify, they're going to have to leave. They might still be there. So if you take away the no cause eviction, then that opens this whole can of worms of trying to get people to testify against the tenant, because the landlord doesn't always experience these things. And so at least if at the end of the lease, a legal contract that we have with this other person that says they can stay till June, and then at the end of the lease, you say, you know, this isn't working out and we're not going to renew the lease. If you take that away too, it's very scary to me. And so I hope that you'll consider the end of the lease and the end of a legal contract just as sacred as any contract that you would sign with anyone over a mortgage or any other agreement, so that we don't have that, I think, very serious problem at the end of the lease. But I can tell you it takes about 20 or 30 hours for me to find a new tenant and go through everything and sign a lease and check them in. I don't want to do that, not with a good tenant. So I think the danger of having someone move at the end of the lease, if they've been a good tenant, I think for me, it's next to zero. And I'm not sure that that wouldn't be true with most landlords, you know, unless things have been mentioned, like their friend wants to move in or their daughter or something. That's something, but it doesn't happen very often. So I hope you'll keep that in mind and just let us have that contract and work through it.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Okay, next we have Mark Porter.
Okay. Mark, you look like you're activated. There you go. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
All
Hey,
right.
Brian.
Good.
Good. Brian, a couple of things I want to talk to you about. I'm not going to reiterate a lot of things. I've gone through, in all honesty, the outside of the evictions I've participated in strictly for non-payment of rent I have not renewed some tenants at the end. And you've got to understand the circumstances that this is. This isn't just like they and I have words. This is the guy's knuckling his girlfriend, and she refuses to press charges against it. And the tenant next door hears her head going off the wall all the time. All right? These are terrible, terrible things that cause us to not renew leases. Very rarely is it because they owe us a couple of $100, right? And it's a very expensive process to turn people over. This is because they're having loud parties and they have a scanner. And guess what? They hear when the place is called on a police complaint and they turn the noise down. Cops show up, can't prove anything, they go away, the noise turns back up again. And this doesn't really impact me. What it impacts is those people that are living next door. The other tenants, I made a promise to. I made a promise to them that I was going to give them peaceful enjoyment, and that goes away. There's another piece to this. I know people have been going on that, but there's another piece to this ordinance that reads, and I know you've been doing the investigating on maintaining a rent control piece to this so that we couldn't just raise the rents beyond what the people could afford. It's a very dangerous path to go down. What you're going to force us as landlords to do is to reduce our risk. And that means that we're going to get the best tenants possible in every case. Now, I personally have places rented out. I've had them rented out to Pathways. I've had them rented out to Howard Mental Health, Spectrum. And I have all these tenants that live in my places beyond the Section 8. Some of those are protected classes to where I rented to them because it was the right thing to do. Legally, I had to, but it was the right thing to do. But you know as well as I do, there's those people that are going to fall into the middle. And if I have to wait and go through more showings to get the perfect tenant that could potentially never cause a problem to where I would be renting to them perpetually, it's going to be a problem for those that are having issues out there. Guess what? People getting out of jail on furlough are not protected classes. All right? But it's been more than a couple of times. I know there's a lot of landlords on here that are going to say that a single mother moves in with a couple of kids, great tenant, and all of a sudden the boyfriend shows back up after getting out of jail for 3 months or a year or 2 years and moves in. Now I've got some choices I have to make. Do I want to spend a couple $1,000s to try to evict for violation of the lease? Or do I want to just let the lease expire in 2 or 3 months and they can move on to another place? So we're getting put into, as landlords, we're getting put into the spot where we're going to have to make some tough decisions, and certainly make those decisions based on how do I reduce my risk as much as possible, because I only have one shot at this. Right? Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark, for those comments. And Christine, do we have somebody lined up for the next?
John Alexander is up next.
Okay. Hello, John. You just have to unmute. Hi there.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
We can.
Great. So hello, everyone. Hello, Brian.
Hi, John.
I'll be as brief as possible. I bought my house in the late 90s, turned it from the Addams family house to a nice place to live, to raise my kids. I had to move in 2012 to take care of my mom, and so I rented out the house. So my point being that I'm not one of these sort of small-time conglomerates that owns some significant portion of Burlington. And I care a lot about the house, and I care a lot about the people who I rent to, and that they're comfortable and safe and et cetera. And I've mostly had really good luck with really good tenants. But at one point, I rented to a 20-something who had a roommate. Okay, that was fine. But then I started to get a lot of complaints from my neighbors in the South End, very quiet neighborhood, about really loud parties. Every time I would go there, there would be beer cans in the driveway or on the front lawn. Then there were holes in the walls of a place that I have always taken really good care of. I always made a point to tell my tenants, if anything is wrong or needs fixing, please let me know right away. Anyway, so that went on and on with the calls, actually getting calls. I had to move to New York, getting calls sometimes fairly late at night from friends who are neighbors complaining about yet another party. I of course, talked to the tenants about it repeatedly. And then the holes in the walls, they repaired the holes in the walls. The parties still went on. The lease period, I renewed with them because it's very complicated, as we all know, to refill the place. And I had hopes that their seemingly righteous promises to sort of straighten up would be fulfilled. And then they started apparently renting to friends, and it's in the lease that, you know, there are only so many people can be allowed in the house, renting to friends. And I found things like they had disconnected the hardwired smoke detectors. They had someone living who had wedged a bed in between the boiler and the only exit from the basement, and had someone camping out on the second floor back deck. And when they finally left, they handed me like a half a measuring cup full of keys. That gives you an idea in a 2-year period how many people were living there. And when the lease ended in the second year, I did not renew it. If I had had to keep these people who were wantonly flaunting or ignoring both the state laws and city regulations that could have been at least legally at my peril and physically at their peril, I don't know what I would have done. And so, like I say, I've always tried to be a good and caring landlord who cares actually a lot about the house and my neighbors. And so I guess my only point is to say I hope you consider that as you go forward. And that's it.
Thank you, John. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Good to see you. Take care.
Yep. Christine, do we have a few more in the queue?
Yes, sorry, it's going a little slow. Okay. Next, we have Frank.
Frank, we see you on the screen, so you just need to unmute yourself and you're all set.
You have me now?
Yeah, if you could speak up just a little bit, Frank.
Okay. Yeah, you don't have my last name, so it's Frank Donath, D-O-N-A-T-H. And I've been doing this landlord business for over 45 years. And I was really quite surprised, and maybe it's because I don't know a lot of landlords, that this subject came up of the no-fault evictions or not being able to terminate a lease at the end of the lease. Because I do this because I want tenants, and I'm sure you've heard most things I'm going to say tonight, but this is a business for me, and I want tenants, and I also want to give my tenants a good place to live. I think most of my apartments in town, if not all of them, are very good to very, very good in condition and the way they're run. So in all these years, I've never evicted someone for no cause, Although when I have evicted people for non-paying of rent, on lawyer's advice, I've also sent a letter for no cause eviction, which I don't know exactly why they wanted me to do that. But anyway, the evictions have always been because of not paying the rent. That brings up something that when I evict someone for non-paying of rent, I'm doing well if they're gone after by the end of 3 months, because it takes a long time. Now, if I can only evict someone because of a violation in the lease, I know it's going to have to be well documented, and it can take a month or 2 or 3 maybe to well document something, and then you may have to go to court as to whether a judge thinks the reason you're asking someone to terminate their lease is a good cause. And so what I'm getting at, this can be a 3 or 4 or 6 month process to get someone out, even when you evict them for violating the lease. And your lease will have to well cover all sorts of situations. I don't know if you can think of everything. I find it that by allowing tenants this right, it gives them a huge right to this property that they don't own. It gives them a huge right to it, and they don't do any of the maintenance to it. They do have an obligation to pay the rent, but their other obligations become very slim, which is primarily in not annoying neighbors and maybe not destroying the property. I think that this is I would have liked to hear, and I don't know if you even had an opportunity to hear of people who have been evicted for no reason, and hear the landlord and the same landlord as to why, because you need 2 sides of a story. I'm sure this didn't come up because nobody gets evicted for no reason, or leases don't terminate at the end. But I think it's a bad move. And of course, I do feel that landlords should be responsible and take care of their properties and give their tenants a good place to live. And so that's about it. Bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donath.
Okay, we have 3 left. Kim Guidry is next.
And who else, just so we know, we can call it at the end there.
Yep, Mary Maloney and then Larry Miller.
Okay. Okay, Kim, you're up. Kim, you're on our screen, so you could go ahead and you've got it.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
I'm gonna, so I'm here, I'm Kim Guidry, and I'm here with my father, Ira, Alan, and we have a couple townhouses in Burlington, and Dad has had them for, I just figured 34 years, and it has been our priority to create a nice home for people, and a home where people have a rent that feels reasonable, so that they don't feel that they have to have a roommate or they have to have lots of people in the space in order to afford the rent. So it has been actually my dad's model to set our rent rates lower than Burlington market rates, so that people have a differently affordable space. And we also say, if anything is wrong, please call us first thing. We are very responsive. I'm very communicative with tenants. So it's our commitment to provide a very affordable and nice space. And I'm just afraid that if we are forced to litigate to remove people who probably it's not a mutual fit, I am afraid that we are going to have to raise our rents in order to, either be proactive or to afford the cost of the legal fees. And then that kind of stops this path that we have been on for 34 years, creating people who actually we have 2 units and we have single people. We have 1 person in each unit, and they can do that because they can afford to be in one of our townhouses by themselves. And some people just need to live by themselves. So that's my concern.
May I chime in here? I'm Kim's dad.
Sure.
My name, Kim is correct. We have 2 townhouses in Burlington, and they are occupied by single people. And at least one of them is a laughingly low rate.
Rent.
Due to circumstances that we don't need to go in here.
Yeah, but we're charging very low, very below market rate in Burlington.
Yeah. Anyway, never mind. We have a home written lease, but what it amounts to is 3 things. 1, pay the rent. 2, respect the property. 3, get along with your neighbors. That's what it boils down to. If we are required to, or if we are not allowed to not renew a lease, if we're required to renew the lease indefinitely, it seems to me that sounds like a lien on the property. And our warranty deeds say that the seller to us warrants and defends the deed against any claims whatsoever. More or less a quote from your typical words in the warranty deed. And I think that the obligation to maintain a lease, 1, I think that's shaky legal ground. 2, it amounts to a lien against the property. I'd like to tell you a quick story, and we'll say thank you. We had another rental property in a different town. We had 3 problem tenants in succession. We went through 3 court actions, and these guys are very proficient in being a problem. It costs thousands of dollars. In one of the cases, we got an $8,000 judgment from the court. At least 2 lawyers and other people have told me that you'll never collect a nickel on that claim, and they're correct. The court goes through the motions of agreeing that you've got a serious problem, awarding you money, and it all amounts to a handful of ashes. Lawyers have told me that they have never seen anybody collect money from an action such as that. That wasn't Burlington, but it could happen in Burlington just as well. So the bottom line is we have now sold that property because it's just not, there's no way to come out ahead with that.
Thank you.
I think that's what I got to say. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you very much for your time and for letting us speak.
You're welcome. Thank you tonight. Yeah. Christine, we have 2 more speakers, I think. We have a comment submitted by 1 person who sort of missed the opportunity to get into the queue. And since we have only 30 minutes remaining, I think we will take those comments in writing that we have, but at least spend a little time as a committee discussing items on our agenda.
Okay, Mary Maloney.
You are all set. If you unmute yourself, Mary Maloney, we will be connected.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay, so just a couple things. I am a brand new landlord, been maybe 3-4 years now. And I lived in a property in the Old North End that I'm renting now. And so I care for it deeply. I make sure that there's the proper people in there and I take good care of it. Whenever there's anything going on, I'm there. We currently have 2 amazing tenants. I'm so blessed for them. One of them is from Michigan. One of them is a doctor that takes care of the property. So we're thrilled about that. And I truly enjoy being a landlord. The tenants prior were awful tenants, and we had to non-renew their lease, and there was a lot of damage to the property. There was a lot of animosity around neighbors and everything. So if I was unable to non-renew their lease and they were still there, I would be in a very bad situation because they stopped paying rent, they damaged the property, and they damaged the reputation of the area that the home is in. So I think that if we lost the ability to non-renew a lease, and I guess being new to this, I don't understand what's the purpose of a lease if we can't renew it. Why would people want to get into a place where there were some bad tenants next door? So also a situation where I have a family member, which I do frequently, they're moving back into town and they want to rent the place and I can't give it to them, although I own it. I do agree that the tenants need to be able to have, they know what their lease is, the particular time when it begins and when it ends. So they should be preparing for after it ends, what are they going to do? So I think
Thank you very much for sharing with us.
One more thing too is like the just cause for ending a lease.
Yeah.
I guess that needs to be determine exactly what that is so that we can make sure to take records. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah,
Sarah.
thank you for sharing with us. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. I think Larry Miller is in the queue to be our last speaker tonight.
Yes, I'm just waiting. There it goes. Okay, moving Larry Miller over now.
Okay, Larry, we see you on the screen when you're ready to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I want to talk more about process, the process of the CDNR committee. And I know that you have a little bit of a time constraint, but to some extent, the time constraint you're dealing with right now is really due to your own actions, because the reason that you have a lot of landlords speaking is because of me. And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm saying that more that I should not have solicited that input. You should have solicited that input. And I find that the order of your process is so backwards to me and to many other people, in that you come up with language, you send the language to city council, it's in charter change, and now you're doing research, and now you're getting input from landlords. When all of that should have happened, research and input, prior to writing language. And I know you're writing enabling language to down the road let the ordinance committee write the language, but that is very concerning to many people, to leave that process to later. It should be now. There should be more discussion, robust discussion now. And looking at the process and how this committee has handled itself is really disturbing to me. And so I've had repeated assurance from this committee, specifically from you, Brian, that you would get landlord input. You have said it time and time again in meetings. You and I had a phone conversation, and none of that happened, by the way. The input was never solicited by anyone on this committee from landlords. There was a small email that went out to a select number of landlords. I've written letters to you. I've spoken at meetings. Again, constant assurances, hasn't happened. And Brian, you and I spoke on the phone. I said, why don't you get in touch with Bill Ward? They have the database because landlords have to, every April, pay fees for each apartment, and we have to give all our contact information. So I knew they had our addresses and they have our emails and phone numbers, and I asked you, why don't you contact them and solicit input from landlords? You said you would call Bill and see if you could do that. But clearly you didn't, because it never happened. But then Joan Shannon is now faced with, as the chair of the Charter Exchange Committee, she's now faced with this language, realizing that research and input has not been given in the CDNR stage. So she goes to Bill Ward and she asks him if he can send out the letter, exactly what I asked you to do. And she gets heat for it. Tom Proctor made a statement in one of these meetings recently, blaming her and the biased way that she did it. You made a statement in 2 meetings ago about how maybe you should send out a card to all tenants getting input. And I just need to quickly read Bill Ward's email. The email that went out to the landlords was not written by Joan, it was written by Bill. And all it says is, dear property owners, property managers, I was asked by the Charter Change Committee to send you a notice that the City of Burlington is hosting a Charter Change Committee meeting on Wednesday, September 23rd at 5:30 p.m. Your input is welcome at the meeting. The item of interest for property owners is a charter change question, and it outlines, it shows the language that you have written, gives the time, date, and so on, how to join. And at the bottom it says, please see the attached resolution and agenda for the meeting. I encourage you to provide input at the meeting and not via reply to me. Thank you. Nothing biased about that. The city attorney has said that was totally acceptable to do that. This committee should have done that, and it didn't. So, and now you are actually being critical of Joan, and other people are being critical of Joan, when all she's trying to do is get the input that you should have done before. Also, obviously the transparency issue, not only did you have a meeting and you explained that you didn't know the meeting was warned, the September 16th meeting, but you were discussing things via email or phone, I have no idea, prior to the September 16th meeting. And the September 16th meeting is where you decided the scope of research to be done. Again, research that really should have been done before you had language. So I have attended and watched the Zoom meetings for all year. And I have seen on more than one occasion the city attorney explain to this committee specifically what is acceptable and not acceptable in meetings and outside of meetings. So even I know the law and the rules based on the city attorney, and you broke them by having that kind of communication without even having a meeting. Interesting that when you presented scope of research, there wasn't really any discussion on it because you guys all knew about it. It seems like. It's hard to believe not. So now, so in terms of the process of this committee and the transparency, I don't know, your reputations are kind of shot the way you're handling it. And the language and what you ended up coming up with was based on lobbying efforts by Vermont Legal Aid, Burlington Tenants Union, RAD, this usual group of people. There was one particular meeting back in July. It was a full presentation by all of these people. The whole meeting, that was it. It was pretty much them talking. And you guys knew that they were coming on. You knew they were making a presentation. The agenda didn't really say that. It was like, wow, okay. And then coincidentally, the language that you came up with was pretty much exactly what Vermont Legal Aid was looking for, and Burlington Tenants Union also. So now it's off to charter change, and now you're doing the research. It's baffling to me. And ultimately what the three of you are doing is you have created an adversarial relationship between landlords and you. And so if this language in the future, if it happens to not pass, that will be on your shoulders because of what you have done this year so far. That's all I have to say today.
Okay, looks like we've wrapped up for now. I think Councillor Hightower had something prevent her from joining us tonight. Councillor Carpenter, we have one item that I think we absolutely have to deal with on our agenda. So I have 5 pages of notes from tonight that we could go through, but I don't think we are able to do that right now. So do we have somebody to present? Is it Luke who's going to present the COVID update?
Yes, I will move him over now.
Hey, Luke.
Hi, Councilor.
Given that we just had an hour of public comment and we'd like to spend a little bit of time coming back to that issue, if there's something you feel you can't get relayed to us, we can come back to it, but just ask you to be as succinct as possible.
I will be as succinct as possible, and I really appreciate the committee just making time to go through this. It's very important to CEDO's process and to the city's process. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see the presentation.
We can, yep.
All right, great. And if I can just get this into presentation mode. So just kind of quick laying the groundwork. This should be about 5 minutes. We're here to essentially solicit input. We're holding a public hearing as part of a standard HUD process to bring CDBG funds into Burlington. Those are community development block grant funds. We came to this committee, I believe, in May and sort of did a very similar exercise that we are about to do in even more accelerated fashion, but this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise to anyone. So the quick background here. So in entitlement year 2020, we received essentially 2 sets of funding, about $700,000, which is a normal sort of annual CDBG fund into Burlington, and a $450,000 tranche of coronavirus funding that the federal government made available to Burlington. And we essentially laid out a process to accept those funds to focus on food, shelter, and small business assistance. We also changed the typical process that Burlington has in place to essentially expedite the process of bringing these dollars into Burlington so that we could get them out quickly to individuals, businesses, and nonprofits that were affected by the virus. So we are essentially coming to you to inform you that we have a new tranche of funding coming, and that was sort of alerted to us in September of 2020. We're going to receive about $700,000 in coronavirus funding, and that is in 2 different sources. And again, this is complicated, so if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them now or later. But essentially, we have $300,000 as part of our Burlington specific entitlement. We also have $400,000, which is part of the state funded CDBG funding, which normally can't go into Burlington, but this cycle the state has opted to allocate those dollars to municipalities on a formula basis. So that's how they arrived at $400,000, which is very good news. It does add another layer of complexity where we now have to go to the state for approval for our plans on how to use these funds. So what is going to happen, or what has happened and what will happen? So we have posted a draft action plan for how we plan to use these funds. And that is available for public comment through the 25th. We are now holding the public hearing to solicit additional input from the committee on the use of these funds. After tonight, we then will go to this, we will make our submission to the state on our proposed use of the funds for their November 5th board meeting. we will also come to the full Board of Finance and City Council to present our plans and to essentially request approval, preemptive approval for accepting the funds if HUD decides that they like our plan. And then on the 11th, we will submit to HUD for our Burlington specific funding. So hopefully that's slightly clearer than mud, but there's lots of steps, and I'm joined by Katie Kinstead and Todd Rawlings and also Christine Curtis on the CEDO team, who have really been working diligently to advance the ball on this as quickly as possible. And so we are looking at a very accelerated timeline yet again for the process that usually takes much longer. So if I go to my next slide here, this just gives you a sense of what we are doing with the money. And so what you're looking at is focus areas that we've developed for these funds, and then the source of funding over time, and the subtotals, so you can see sort of the total amount for each focus area. And so what, the takeaways from this is we're essentially allotting the new round of funding both to existing programs, namely our rental assistance and our business and worker support programs. We are also, and to the administrative costs of running these programs. We are also adding new programs, namely homelessness services, food support, and community health efforts. So we've sort of built out our plan based on conversations and feedback, both internally with city departments, with the Resource and Recovery Center as we've been evaluating the need in the community, and with a small group of partners in the community that we work with, nonprofit partners that we work with frequently to assess what the need is. I'll also note here, kind of the breakdown of funds, about half, a little over half, is going to essentially housing services. So if you housing and homelessness and rental assistance is essentially half of the funding, and then the rest is broken up between business and worker support, and then a number of other programs. This slide, and again, I know this is complicated, a lot to absorb. This breaks it out a little bit in more granular detail so that you can see kind of what we are thinking right now. Again, what we're asking for is sort of input on the major focus areas. Are we missing anything? Is there something that needs to be added at this time? We are going to have ample opportunity to change course as the need develops. So we certainly will be moving things around, but we are pretty confident this is a good first attempt. And importantly, we need to have sort of a plan for how we use the funds that we can bring to the state and bring to HUD, and then so that they can award the money, and then we can sort of work through program design and all of those other issues. And I'll just note sort of the new funding here includes new business and nonprofit grants to allow HVAC improvements, which as more data has become clear around COVID, that indoor spaces, if you have greater air quality in HVAC, you lower the risk of transmission of disease. So we want to make that a priority of these funds. We also are in the process of designing a program after conversations with a number of local partners, including the hospital, that there are have been and continue to be deep needs around the need for healthcare workers. And so we are hoping to direct some funding to the training of low and moderate income folks in Burlington to get them upskilled to jobs that are in sort of even more significant demand in our community today. So that's that LNA certification program. Finally, the community health bucket. We think it's very important, especially as the weather gets colder. In order to keep our community healthy, we want to do everything we can to keep people outside. And so we are envisioning a program where we would help nonprofits and organizations have capacity to essentially rethink their programs that are normally done inside in the winter in Burlington to do it outside, because that is both good for those nonprofits that are struggling and also good for our community. So that's just kind of some of the general ideas for how we're using these funds. Finally, most of these funds will be awarded sort of to nonprofit partners to deliver on the goals that we have per usual. So this is how things normally work. The city has been administering some direct funds. So for instance, our small business grant program, we've been directly funding businesses. So created a program, evaluating applications, getting those funds out the door as quickly as possible. So we have a mix, but for the most part, we are awarding funds to organizations. And over the next few months, we will be designing the process for how that application will work, sort of what the grading is, how we will award the funds. And the committee and the council will have opportunity to have input in that process. So I'll just again say what we're talking about today is essentially, are those focus areas right? And here are the totals. Here's what we're thinking for allotments. Is this a good starting point? And is the committee comfortable with essentially sponsoring this in a slightly different form when it goes to Board of Finance and City Council? So,
thanks, Luke. There's a lot there.
Yeah, I will stop there, open it up for questions, but I know you're tight on time. So
we are. It's a shame that we're having to do this in such a tight time frame. I am going to, move my. I have a commitment at 7, but I'm going to probably postpone joining that. That's another Zoom event at 7, but I think we'll go longer. We're going to need to go till 7:15 at least. My question about the HVAC safety grants is, I was aware that Efficiency Vermont was providing assistance of that nature to certain types of organizations. Wondering whether BED is also providing that assistance, and if this is to augment it and to kind of match those funds, or if this is in lieu of BED assisting with HVAC upgrades like that.
yeah, that's a great question, Counselor. So this is not in lieu of the BED program. So BED has been offering sort of a number of, sort of a suite of services, both sort of consulting advice to any organization that needs help thinking through their HVAC issues. They've also gained access to an EDA revolving loan fund to award loans to businesses making HVAC improvements. We envision this specific HVAC program, and actually for the most part, all of our programs as gap filling programs. So if any businesses appear to be left out, or nonprofits appear to be left out by some of the BED programs, this could be a fill-in. So again, we're sort of building this as we go, but we're trying to be as adaptive as possible to the need, but with the sort of overarching direction of, let's make this funding available. We know it's a community need. If it's being met elsewhere, we will design the program so that it can be meeting a need that is actually there, not being supported by another fund.
Okay, and the next thing is, will the same CDBG community development block grant requirements that it serve low and moderate income people be in effect and be observed in this program, just like every other?
Yeah, so it's another great point, Counselor. All of these programs need to meet the standard, essentially low and moderate income benefits. So they need, the beneficiaries of the programs have to be low and moderate income Burlingtonians. Okay, those are my main questions. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on the allocation, looking at what you saw? No?
No, it's good.
I think you've done a great job.
Yeah,
and
you spent a lot of time on it.
It's clear that you guys, your staff has done the heavy lifting with you here, and we're grateful for that, and just thankful that we have these resources. They make a difference. They're not nearly enough, and hopefully we'll see some additional federal assistance to municipalities, because we are very financially constrained and will be for several fiscal years to come due to COVID. So, thank you, and all the credit goes to the CEDO staff, which has really been doing a lot with not much over these past few months. So the question is, do you need us to adopt a resolution at this point, or is this more of a action that is primarily a public hearing?
If we could make a motion just to recommend and approve for City Council so that we can move this forward for City Council and BOF approval.
Councilor Carpenter, do you want to make a motion?
I so move.
Moved by Councilor Carpenter. I guess I'm seconding it, since we have two people of three, a committee of three here. Any further discussion? This is your chance. Otherwise, we'll call the question. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you very much. And the issue is important enough that I think we both it's safe to say we both wish that we could be spending more time on this, but I think it's a testament to how much we trust staff to do the work. So, thank you. Okay, Christine, if I thought I had the agenda up, but I don't.
Yes, I can share my screen real quick.
Okay. Councilor Carpenter, there's a lot of questions that came up. We have about 30 people still participating in this meeting. It seems as though we ought to address some of the key questions. I noted many of them down. I wrote them down, and I wanted to just maybe pose them and ask for your help answering them as succinctly as possible.
Councilor Bryan, how much time do you think we've got here?
We've got till, it is now 6:55. I have until 7:20, so we have 25 minutes.
I'm happy to have a discussion of the particular questions. I guess before we go that, and you'll see item 4, which is attempting to answer some of that. And I'm just sort of thinking out loud around the best way to organize this. And I guess stepping back a minute and repeating what we've said a number of times is that we went into this endeavor, which actually the committee's been talking about since last winter, with the intent of having a fairly broad, open, enabling provision for charter, because in Vermont, that's the only way we can look at things like landlord-tenant law. And we had a discussion early on around the strategy of doing it sort of that way, or really fully vetting out ordinances. And we explicitly decided to do what we've done, which is recommend the charter change language that we recommended. Obviously, subsequent to that, people are interested and have lots of questions about how would that work. It had been my vision that we would, on a parallel track, work to get, I call it permission from the state, and then we would work over the course of really the next year of looking at each of the possible alternatives to what might go in an ordinance. And so I hadn't originally felt the need to fully flush that out. There's obviously interest and demand for that. And so the purpose of my proposal on enhanced charter change is to get out the fact that there will be certain baselines that we would consider as we consider the charter change. So that's sort of the preface. I guess I'm sort of struggling with what's the best way to have the discussion and answer on all the questions. Somebody talked about, putting together a working group. And I think as we look at the details of ordinances, you absolutely need to do that. And I would assume that that would and will happen as we move along in this next year. I hadn't assumed it to be necessary for the charter change. We did get input from both tenants and landlords, and it's to be blunt, quite divided. So we are quite aware of that. So I guess I'm, Councilor Bryan, just sort of looking about sort of thoughts around how to really tackle the question answering that people bring up. I do want to make sure people know there is a lot of information out there on just cause eviction. It exists in 4 whole states in probably 50 communities. It's not a new concept. So it's been tested and proven in lots of communities. We would not be the first by any means. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about sort of how to proceed. We can try in the next 10 or 15 minutes to answer some of the questions that just got brought up tonight.
Well, I
and
think
wait.
the enhanced resolution may actually answer some of them right there. So maybe that's, in fact, the best way is to start discussing your proposed enhanced resolution and see if we can't touch on some of the key points that were raised as really as both comments and questions that folks, I believe, if provided the information, would be somewhat relieved by the responses. And I think that will come out in that enhanced resolution. If you want to go through that, do we have that up as a document on the committee page?
Yes, I don't know if Christine.
Yep.
Could put that-
Christine
So
has that,
this
yep.
is the draft resolution, correct?
Yep.
Yep, I will share my screen right now.
And by background, this was something that Councilor Carpenter drafted as a discussion item for this meeting. It is is intended to provide more specificity without getting into the detailed aspects of creating an actual ordinance, which is a complicated process, but we have a charter revision or charter change that is broad and sort of enabling. And then there's the ordinance adoption process, which follows voter approval or voter approval. Assuming voter approval, it then goes to the state legislature. It then gets addressed by the city council through its ordinance committee. So it is a long process here. The details to be worked out, but this is intended to provide some level of flesh to the bones, I think. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, it's important to point out that hundreds of communities have a just cause eviction provision in their ordinances or in their state law. So we've got lots of examples to look at. And they vary, they can vary a lot. Now that two additional whole states have adopted it, there's some commonality in Oregon and California, although they have many, many communities that had that already in effect predating the state law. New Jersey's probably the longest and the one worthy of looking at, and then New Hampshire also has a version as well. So, and that is again up on the website. What I did with this resolution was try to pick out the common elements that are typically in just cause eviction. I mean, this has been passed. It's not been litigated. It's been working in states for a long time. And there again, there's versions and variations of how you structure your ordinance. So I tried just to identify what was common and suggest that the council, if we choose to enact ordinances, and adding a comment that getting charter permission doesn't require you to do it, and it allows you to undo it. So at any point in the future, you can do portions of it or not do it at all. So I, again, with this, tried to put in what I thought were common elements that we would want to be sure. And I could just walk through them.
Yeah, let's go through.
And I think this is where we need more input and suggestions.
Let's scroll down to the second resolve clause, which is the be it further resolve. That's where the meat of this is.
Yes, yeah. So it's where the red language is there.
Yeah.
Okay, so common, and again, is that this is really targeted as what I want to call regular rental housing. So conversely, specialty housing, transient housing, licensed facilities, dorms, seasonal things have all typically been eliminated from a just cause requirement. It's intended to look at, like, as I said, regular residential things. All of the just cause ones we looked at had some level of provision for owner occupied properties, provisions that allow the owner to withdraw it from the rental market, provisions where the owner or family member intends to move in, provisions where properties need substantial repair or renovation, and provisions that deal with in-unit rentals and sublets. In-unit rentals, I think, is the proper term for if you have a roommate. So it doesn't mean because one roommate overlaps that all the roommates can stay into a unit. So that would be, I think, particularly in Burlington, something we would want to be very clear about. And sublets as well. Sublets are not generally given the provisions under a just cause eviction provision. So those are those sort of common themes that I've seen. What has come up a lot is, is this, quote, rent control? Many communities have rent control. And in fact, in Oregon and California, that recently passed just cause eviction provisions statewide, they also made provisions for what they refer to as rent stabilization or rent stabilization or anti-rent gouging. Those are the two terms of art. And so the conversation might be, what is the difference between rent control and rent stabilization? I think they're versions of each other. Rent control is an older version, very targeted at a specific apartment where the rent stays the same. Rent stabilization tends to be ordinances where rent increases are set broadly, and they usually reset on an opening term. I don't believe that's what our intent was to provide or to suggest at this point. New Jersey probably has a provision that sort of meets what we were talking about, which is what they call an unreasonable or unconscionable rent increase, which says, effectively the landlord can't just go in and double the rent in order to get rid of a tenant. So that may be a model that we want to consider in terms of New Hampshire does not have any rent control or rent stabilization, but they do have just cause eviction prohibitions in the state of New Hampshire, but they have nothing financially. The communities are outside of the states are mixed, whether they have any, like Washington State has no, does not speak to rents. I think we heard our concerns that, one of the ways to get rid of a tenant is, just double their rent, make, rather than 1,500, make it 3,000. The New Jersey provision allows the court to look and say, is that reasonable? Does it meet the market rent? Does it take in effect the landlord's expenses? So that's sort of what I was trying to capture there. Most of the ones that we've looked at have between a 1 and 2 year time frame where you have to be a full occupant for a year, sort of a test drive. So if it doesn't work out the first year, then you can ask somebody to leave. Once they've settled in and it's really their home for years 2 and on, then this would put in. And that's the group I think we hear the most from, are people who've been settled in to their apartment, not done anything, and then all of a sudden are being asked to leave for no reason. And I will say that almost all of the reasons I heard tonight, the tenants or landlords talked about are reasons to evict somebody. I mean, I should, and I think I've said this earlier in other meetings. I mean, I have worked in the housing field for 35 plus years. I've been very involved at the management level, so I am familiar with the eviction process, both professionally. There was a period in my life personally where I was a landlord, so I am familiar with the eviction process, and a lot of the scenarios that I heard are causes for you to evict a tenant. It's not easy to do, and it's not fun to do, but it can be done. And I think we pointed out in some of our other literature that this is a common provision in any property that gets federal assistance. There's already over 2,200 units in Burlington, or 2,300 units in Burlington, that are already subject to this clause, and it's been manageable. And certainly has been manageable in the other states where it is effective. So what I had hoped to do here with the committee, and I don't think because Councilor Hightower is not here that we want to necessarily decide this tonight, but introduce the concept of asking the charter change and/or the city council to add more language so people understand what would typically be in a just cause eviction ordinance.
Yeah. Okay. It obviously will be a conversation that we'll need to continue because of the fact that Councilor Hightower was unable to join us tonight. I think we should aim to do that as soon as possible so that we can, in fact, circle back with the Charter Change Committee before they report back to council, which I believe is due back at the first meeting in December. Does that sound right to you?
I thought I heard December, no, excuse me. Charter Change, I thought is going to meet on November 4th on this. They were asked by City Council to bring something back no later than the first week in December. So we have November to work on this.
Okay. All right. I think that list there is still to be determined, I guess. It's a suggested starting point, but I think it does certainly speak to a number of the questions that were asked about how owner-occupied properties are treated, how the issue of bringing family members, not close friends, that's not quite the same. Somebody did say, what if my close friend wants to move in? That's not usually a provision that I've seen in any examples out there. So that's not how it's normally treated. The notion that this provision, this process would somehow make it more difficult to terminate tenants who are violating the lease is something I heard quite a bit in tonight's comments. I think that's a common misperception, and it'll take some real work to explain that and assure people that is not the intent and that is not the impact. Just Cause is exactly the opposite. If you have a lease and someone's violating your lease, those provisions, you still are able to terminate a tenancy based on existing landlord-tenant law. So that is I think that's conflating the issues quite a bit, actually. That's, I believe, something that we've heard, we will continue to hear as well. So that is something we will need to do far more education around. The idea that I think we heard from in our last meeting, though, that the notion that if a tenant is making life difficult for other tenants and yet they're not violating the lease, that's what I think we heard about when we met on Monday morning. We had a meeting, and the notion that we would bring in a mediation process is one that I personally would support very much. I don't know how, we haven't yet heard from the city attorney on how to incorporate that into this process. To have a mediation as a, you can't really mandate mediation. It's not like labor law where you can have binding arbitration and both sides have to come to the table whether they want to or not. But yet, I think the notion that mediation could perhaps be used to address areas where there's tension but don't need to result in someone being terminated or evicted. I think that's the goal, is to try and find a path forward that allows somebody to remain and hopefully peacefully coexist with their neighbors. So that's really that I believe is something we, at least I believe, and I believe you do as well, Councilor Carpenter. So
I would love to see that allowed / I don't know that it'd be required. So I guess I have sort of two questions for the city attorney that I would love to add in here, which is, and I don't know authority-wise how that works. One is, can we propose a mediation step. And I think that would be great. I just don't know how that relates to state law authority. And just as a side for people listening, I've just learned that with some of the COVID money statewide, the Landlord Association and CVOEO and Legal Aid are actually putting together a statewide mediation pilot program for this next year. So that's really very exciting. I don't have a lot of detail at some point.
In addition, the main cause of all evictions is non-payment of rent. I mean, over 70% of evictions in Vermont are due to non-payment. So Vermont Legal Aid and other advocates have been pushing for creation of an essentially eviction prevention or housing retention fund, which I believe they estimated it at around 800,000 for the entire state for an entire year, to keep people from losing their housing due to failure to pay rent. You know, there's the devil's in the details, of course, because you have to get into questions of, are you just prolonging it if you have somebody who's just chronically unable to meet their rent, and then you have rental assistance programs that need to kick in order to provide that level of surety to the property owner that this person who cannot afford their rent or cannot even pay their rent is going to be able to continue to pay their rent. You know, we're not trying to do this so that we can make it easier for people to violate their leases or get away with not paying rent as a goal. That is not my goal in advancing this concept. And I think it's best summarized for me anyway as one counselor who believes that we can find and strike a balance, and that the way no cause works right now puts too many people at risk of sort of arbitrary and capricious actions of a property owner that has more than just an inconvenience to the people who are on the receiving end. And we do have some examples of people who have experienced no cause evictions whose lives were impacted in a significant way. And I think if that information, when that information is more widely circulated, I think people will take a pause and understand a little bit more about what is being proposed and why we're proposing it.
One additional question that I thought of is our authority, and I'm not to add just causes. You know, for instance, I noticed looking at some of the other states, they have clearer nuisance provisions as just cause. So again, I'm a little fuzzy on our authority to do that, but that may be something that we want to be sure to ask for. Again, just kind of reminding, we're in the permission asking stage, not the details. So I want to make sure that we can add causes, for lack of a better way to say that, if it seems reasonable to do that, as well as.
Do you mean within state law? Is that what you're trying to get to?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I think we will have to have the city attorney join us at our next meeting because they have a number of questions I think the city attorney is going to be best positioned to answer. We haven't had a minute to even talk about this notion of a frequently asked questions document, but that was posted, I believe, on the webpage for today's meeting. So that is a work in progress. That is just something that that I drafted up, and we are in the process of considering anything that we would add to that. We tried to ensure that we've covered the main issues that have been raised at public meetings, and they continue to get raised by people in their email comments and in comments to the committee in public forum.
Do you have any more questions? You have a list of questions, and I do too, that we think we can answer tonight? Or, I mean, one of my thoughts was, in addition to spending more time on this, what should go into the additional resolution is maybe we could set up a forum, for lack of a better way to say this, it's really the frequently asked questions, but taking the questions and then trying to have a discussion for them. It is awkward with the public comment process. We don't have a really good way of back and forth, but I want to try to answer things as people. So we might in the next meeting solicit questions, really specific. I hear the landlords that this is an additional regulation, and I hear that it will make eviction harder. But I also hear that it keeps families stable. They're not just bumped around. And several landlords made the comment about, well, we'll just ask them to leave and they can find another place to stay. Would that it would be so easy. One of the reasons Burlington is looking at this is that's what's not possible. They're asked to leave and there is nowhere else to go. And they're uprooted from a home they may have been in 2, 3, 4 years. So that's exactly the reason we're looking at this.
Well, we also had on Monday a suggestion or a request that we expand our scope of research. And while our research is rather limited, and I don't think we're going to be able to expand it, that doesn't mean that we can't delve into those questions which were asked. And those were, what are the pros and cons? What are the, is there any objective research that's been done on communities that have just cause eviction measures in place, and what have been the experiences of those communities? What has worked and what hasn't worked? We were not able to do that level of research. That's a much more significant undertaking, both in terms of the scope, the time, and the level of research expertise that I think is needed. So we will be looking to the CEDO and the City Attorney's Office, honestly, to help us with that. That's still an important question, but that information can be gathered outside of this much smaller research scope that has been undertaken by a research assistant. In addition, that question about can we in fact bring in a mediation component or something along those lines that would attempt to address the conflict without having to go to court. So sort of a non-court option for addressing the legitimate issues that the owner and maybe other tenants have, while not necessarily displacing the person who's living there as the only solution. So sort of that nuclear option, which I'm sure nobody does easily. That is difficult to tell someone that you're basically not allowing them to stay. I'm sure that is something that I can guarantee no one does it, without a lot of reservation. So there's really, it's either that or put up with it. And so we need something in between.
Well, one of the, and again, I know you're running out of time, Brian, but I am going to assume that many of the landlords that we've heard from tonight are good landlords and they pay attention. What we've not heard from, and is harder to get your arms around, is the folks that are asked to leave out of retaliation, out of discrimination. And that is where, in fact, I think where we do see a lot of this. And that's a harder thing to wrap around. And I don't think perhaps any of the landlords here are going to say that's why they asked somebody to leave, and they didn't. So the area to wrap our arms around is, I see as sort of the nuisance making issues, and how do we ensure that if a tenant is a nuisance, that there's a proper way to get them to leave, and that they get a fair hearing, because sometimes that's just someone's nuisance is not everyone's nuisance.
Yeah, okay. In response to the comments about our process, I will acknowledge that we've had some bumps in the road for sure around the warning of the meeting, around the scope of discussing our scope of research. Discussing your scope of research is really more like throwing ideas back and forth to each other. It is not a policy-making decision. It is not a allocation of significant city resources. It is more of an attempt to try to get at some of these issues. And I think the committee, in good faith, was trying to get at the issues that are gathered through a research process. And the notion that the committee has not been soliciting public comment is runs in the face of how the public process works. We post meetings on a public agenda. These meetings are open. People have been notified. Notifications don't need to be mailed out or emailed to people to get them informed of the upcoming meetings. We've never undertaken massive email outreach to all employers when we're discussing issues that affect businesses. We have a limitation as far as what the city is expected and required to do in terms of soliciting input. But when the Apartment Owners Association is notified, the assumption is they will be using their network to notify their members. And we heard from some of those owners, but no, we did not make a major effort to notify either tenants or landlords. There is a very vocal group and a very organized group working on behalf of tenants, and that's the reality of democracy. When people organize and they show up, that's part of the process. So I would just point that out, that our process has been going on for many months. We started discussing this last winter. I personally had a health event in my family that I had to address in February, and so we postponed a meeting in February, and then COVID hit right after that, and we had about a 2 or 3 month lag period where nothing really moved along. And so we brought the issue back up, and we have held numerous meetings on this topic, and all of those meetings have been publicly available and publicly warned, except the one meeting where we had an administrative glitch where we did not have the meeting properly warned. But we corrected that right away and have moved on. And I hope we will stay focused on the content and the issues. And I assume that people come at this with goodwill, and I hope that folks will acknowledge that that's how we're approaching it. We may not agree in the end, and that's okay, but that's part of the process. Councilor Carpenter, would you? We have minutes to approve without Councilor Hightower here. I'm not sure that we should. I would ask if Christine thinks we need to. I think those minutes have been posted well within the time window when they have to be posted.
Yes,
So
yep.
Yeah.
They can stay as draft for now. This was that big backlog of minutes that, need to be approved. But they are all up on the website. They're all available. We'll just keep them in draft form, and we can table this until the next meeting if you'd like.
Okay, well, we have to aim to get back together fairly soon, maybe even would next week be an option for you, Councilor Carpenter?
Yes, it is. I am anxious.
Okay.
Councilor Hightower probably has a more busier schedule than.
Yeah, she's double. I think she's double booked tonight. So I think
because of her work on the
police issues
committee.
Yeah.
So I will defer to her. I don't think I have any. I'm just going to look here. We have council on Monday night, but other than that, I don't believe I have any. Any problems. And I think it will take us some time, so hopefully we can get a chunk of time to discuss what ought to be outlined as concepts that we want to pursue, and the ones we don't want to pursue, then we should say that.
Okay, a question that did come that I didn't see till just now, Sarah, is this language you've proposed to replace the charter language, or is it in addition to?
I was proposing it in addition to, again, because it's this two-step process, which is we need to get permission from the state. So that's what would be, as I understand it, be on the ballot. We're going to the state saying, allow us the flexibility to develop just cause eviction ordinances. And then the second resolve, I guess, if you want to call it that, says that we, the city council, agree that at a minimum, these particular items would be part of an ordinance. You don't, as I understand it, you don't typically put a whole ordinance on a ballot. That goes before the council. So, and I don't know if those are two separate resolutions, to be honest. I put them together because they sort of follow. And one asks the council to be willing to put this on the March ballot. The second says we commit to making sure that any ordinances we write in the future have these elements in it.
That's the question the city attorney will be answering, and we'll
Yeah.
bring her to our next meeting. And there was a question that I wanted to at least respond to. Oh, where can someone find this? And the link is provided right here. So there it is. All right. Yep. I'm sorry, it's my limit I've reached it, and I need to get on this Zoom meeting now. And it's about police reform that I need to participate in. So.
Okay. Just also to make sure folks know that on that page there somewhere is the information on what happens in other states. I think it's listed under phase. Christine, do you know what we refer to that as? It's Audrey's work.
Audrey's research? Yeah.
Yeah, what's the name of it? How's it listed?
So that would, all of her material will be under the, sorry, it'd be under a different meeting. It'd be under the October 8th meeting.
Okay.
Yep, there's JCE research, just cause eviction research notes. Yep, those are all on the CDNR webpage under the Thursday, October 8th meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so there's no way on terms of how to post it on our page to have it just be its own standalone and not embedded within a meeting agenda, is there? Or a meeting?
Since you mentioned it, we're actually working right now with the city attorney's office. I believe we're going to be creating a just cause eviction page where all of this information will be in one spot so that people don't have to go through the meetings to find these documents. So
Great,
we'll
thank you.
keep you updated on that as that comes.
Excellent.
That would be good.
Thanks for doing that. That's helpful for just being more user friendly and in the spirit of customer service that I think we all would like to adhere to. So thank you. All right, Councilor Carpenter, is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
I think the ayes have it. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll be in
Okay,
touch.
and you'll poll us, or Christine will poll us about a date.
Christine's going to help us schedule this next meeting with the city attorney and with Councilor Hightower's.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.